After a harrowing experience producing the first season of Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, in which the writer's strike meant that the creator and showrunners couldn't actually produce any of the episodes they had written, except the pilot, scrapping a planned 22 episodes down to 9, creator-showrunner Josh Friedman returned for Season 2. This first episode back, he was joined by director David Nutter, who directed the pilot and second episode of Season 1, giving a lot of visual continuity between the two seasons. The season opener, titled Samson and Delilah, follows the fallout of the gangster Sarkeesian's attack on Cameron with a car bomb, and FBI agent Ellison's disastrous raid on the Terminator Cromartie. Both Terminators strike back viciously, but not at the expected targets. As we work our way through Season 2, we'll continue asking the questions that dominated Season 1's episodes. Can humans become more like machines than the Terminators they fight? Can a Terminator become more like a human? What is the deeper meaning behind the fight between the humans and the Terminators? Will Season 2, with a full showrunning team and all 22 planned episodes, fulfill the promise of Season 1? I'm Ian.
And I'm Galvin.
Come with us if you want to
Come
live.
with us if you want to live. We're back, Ian.
We're back.
I know all the people that listen to this podcast missed us terribly.
We were watching a terrible show and a good show.
I don't even remember. Oh, now I remember the terrible. The show was so terrible that I forgot that we watched it.
It was a terrible show. It's very disappointing.
I was like, what terrible show did we watch? I don't even remember watching a terrible show.
It was Daredevil.
Yes, we did watch a terrible show. We also watched a good show, which was Season 2 of Andor. And so that kind of leads to the question. So you're creating this contrast between 9 episodes and 22 episodes. We've had this conversation over the years, like there's a difference between sort of classic TV, which had long seasons of very discrete stories being told in each episode, and then somewhat beginning with X-Files and then increasing more in the 2000s, you began seeing shows that had a continuing storyline that occupied each episode. What are the advantages and disadvantages to having 22 episodes versus 9 episodes? Because for all the problems that they were having with the writer's strike and everything, like Season 1 of Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles is a very tight story.
Yes.
And it's effective in that way, I think.
Yeah, I would say that when you're telling a serialized story, shorter seasons are probably better because Nathan Wilson, in his excellent podcast, Stories Are Soul Food, talks about if you have a TV show, you have a lot of meat that you have to put in the first bite, your first episode, and then you have a lot of meat that you have to put in your last bite, the finale. And then in between that, you're kind of stretching the meat till it becomes kind of like Arby's thin sliced meat. And the amount of stretching you have to do depends very much on how many episodes you're trying to fill and how much meat you have to begin with. And I think that the amount of meat they had for Season 1 was about 9 episodes. I don't know if Season 1 would have been as tight if they'd been given, your full 22 or even a full 13, which is the typical season order. Season 2, I think, is better because there's more focus. They figured out what worked a lot better. But it also has, especially, and this is unfortunately very typical of TV, There's a lot in the middle that kind of meanders and feels a bit lost. They weren't quite able to figure out how to make the middle meat stretch, and so sometimes they added some stuff that maybe was a cucumber and maybe was a pickle but wasn't meat. I think
Yeah,
that
so the context that I was thinking of it, I was thinking about the history of television. So, like I said, there are antecedents, especially in the science fiction genre, for the idea of telling a continuous story. So you have like Twin Peaks, X Files. Sometimes Star Trek would attempt to tell a longer story, but those were typically shorter arcs. Um, I'm trying to remember, when did Babylon 5 come out?
late 90s, late 90s.
Okay. Um, like you have, so like the real precedent for a continuous story being told over a short number of episodes would have been the sort of masterpiece theater BBC novel adaptations that like the 95 Pride and Prejudice, which I just looked up, is 60-minute episodes.
Yeah.
And that's attempting to encapsulate a novel that, because of publishing, and you're the expert on this, but a novel that, because of the publishing uh, format of novels when Austen wrote, was published as a 3-volume novel.
Yeah, and Pride and
And
Prejudice is about
so, like,
350
we just,
pages long.
so, like, in some ways, like, Andor both seasons of Andor, but especially season 2, has returned to that format.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could write Andor as a 3-volume novel.
Andor season 1 as a free. I think Andor season 2 would have to be a 4-volume novel.
Right. Well, we both argued that as good as we thought Andor season 2 was, it could have been a little bit shorter, but
True. I guess that's fair. There's a
but
little
you
bit of
had sort of
stretching
these
at the end.
we had these very discrete episodes that were occurring over 3 episodes in a way that's very similar to the way that Austen structured her novel and the way that it was adapted in the 95 adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Because
that
you have the inciting incident, you have Jane getting sick, you have Mr. Collins showing up, you have the brief relationship forming. Uh, sorry, it's not
with
Willoughby, it's the other one.
Charlotte.
No. Elizabeth and
Wickham.
that's embarrassing. I was like, because my mind kept saying Willoughby, and I'm like, no, that's Sense and Sensibility. Anyway, Wickham, she needs to stop naming her cads with W names.
True.
Anyway, and then you have the Pemberley visit, and then you have the concluding episode with Lydia in London, and like they're sort of very discrete arcs that compose the plot of the novel that in sort of kind of fit into trying to work with that 3-volume structure.
Yeah.
You even have I just thought of this, you even have a similar thing going on with Lord of the Rings where Lord of the Rings is divided into 3 books, 3 volumes that with 2 books each. So you have a total of 6 episodes in Tolkien's story.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think both of you and I are admirers, to circle back to what we were originally talking about. I think both of you and I are admirers of the skill that it takes to develop characters over a series of discrete episodes in sort of the classic TV format. I think what we've come, like, in the production history of television, what we've come full circle to is that prestige television, or so-called prestige television, has just gone into the masterpiece theater novel model,
Yeah.
where it's like
I think
we only need 6, 8, or 10 episodes in order to tell this story, and everything else is just fluff.
and I wish that if they were doing that, they wouldn't hang on to some of the bad habits of longer season television, like the cliffhanger ending. If you're telling a miniseries, tell a miniseries. Don't try and trick us into a new season. You know, if people like your story, they will come back for a new story. Like Andor season 1 could have ended where it was. You don't need to go all the way up to where Rogue One starts. Andor season 1 sets Andor on the path to where he was in Rogue One. Andor season 2, because people liked season 1, was extremely successful. I mean, the ratings just dropped, and we found out it was #1 in all streaming, which is pretty impressive for a 2-season show. Um, but it wasn't because there was like a big cliffhanger about will Andor survive? Like, no, we knew Andor would survive. People wanted to see more from Tony Gilroy and his team and from the cast he'd developed. And I think that's the way that prestige TV should go. It shouldn't pick up these bad habits of cliffhangers and cheap manipulative ploys that oftentimes more serialized TV sometimes falls into.
Hmm.
And we will talk about these ploys because season 2 of Terminator definitely uses some of them, and we'll have to talk about: am I being fair to call it cheap, or do I think it's sometimes effective? Because I do love this show and I love this season, but it does some of the things I just kind of dismissed or criticized.
Well, and you talked about, I mean, a whole other aspect of old-fashioned television. You just talked about ratings. In older TV shows, you get sort of mini cliffhangers during sweeps.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's often a divide even within the season where they'll have some sort of wham episode in the middle of the season because they wanted the rating boost.
Well, and they'll usually spend more
Which is
money on
not
those episodes too.
which is no longer a factor in the era of streaming and binge watching.
Yeah, agreed. All
Okay,
right.
so maybe to transition, I'm making another comparison between Andor and this episode. They wrote themselves into a hole for the cliffhanger of season 1. Does this episode effectively allow the characters to crawl out of the hole and into return to the status quo of the show concept? Because the show concept, as we get in the recap, is stop Skynet from ever existing. And they're doing sort of missions of the week to accomplish that goal. But the problem with this episode, the problem that this episode wants to solve, is that the most natural result of the events of the last episode of season 1 would be that they would all die. Like, especially with the first scene of this episode, like, providence or luck, whatever you want to call it, John Connor is fated not to die, which is sort of the paradox of this entire franchise. John Connor is fated not to die, and therefore some stuff gets pulled out of somebody's butt in this episode in order to make sure that John does not die.
Do you really feel that the gangster threat from Sarkeesian is so much more than the other threats they've faced, especially from Cromartie? I don't know. Sarkeesian kind of feels like a side threat to me.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, Ian. The first scene of this episode is amazing, and we'll talk about the song choice and other things about it in a minute, I guess. But some of the artfulness of the scene is covering over what seems like a plot contrivance, which is that it would make the most sense for Sarkeesian and his goon to just kill Sarah and John right away and then look for the hard drive. And the time that they waste in beating up Sarah and John allows Sarah and John to escape. Like, it's we don't hear what Sarkeesian says because it's a music montage, but he's villain monologuing when he should be just killing the heroes.
I see. I guess one of the reasons it doesn't bother me too much is that Sarkeesian hasn't really been established as a character. He was a bunch of red herrings in the season 1 finale. And so we don't know if he's someone who has self-control and intelligence, or if he's the kind of narcissistic goon who would monologue.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. We'll come back to the opening scene. Let's talk about that, because in addition to resolving the cliffhanger of the last episode, the end of season 1, this episode does sort of provide us with some new characters and plot lines that will continue through this season. So why don't you go over those? We have 3 lines not waiting, no waiting.
Yes.
As TV Trips would say.
So, and honestly, 2 of these lines are pretty much in every episode. And then one of them comes in and out, kind of like a wave coming back every 3 or 4 episodes. You've got John and Sarah and Cameron. In this episode, they're running from Cameron. In most episodes, they're working together. So that's our status quo for that thread. We have Agent Ellison, who in this episode is working with Charlie.
Who is not killed by Cromartie. Even though that would probably make sense.
Well, they kind of lampshade that by saying that Cromartie thinks that Ellison is going to lead Cromartie to the Connors. So,
that's why I said something's getting pulled out of somebody's butt, because that's not how Terminators normally operate.
Well, there's also the idea of damaged chips that is introduced in this episode, which are, I think that would be writers pulling rationality out of their butt.
Yeah.
And then our third thread is the mysterious company run by a woman, a redheaded Scottish woman named Catherine Weaver, who acquires the Turk and plans to use it to change the world.
Yes, and so the Catherine Weaver is played by the uh, grunge rock band lead singer uh, Shirley Manson. Um, yeah, it's an odd casting choice. I thought it was odd at the time. That I think pays off pretty well in this season.
I think she does a fine job. I
But
appreciate.
I mean, you know more about the behind the scenes stuff about the creation of the show than I do. I just watched the show, Ian. But but we uh, it's interesting the way that they chose to segue from their Circassian plot line into the Catherine Weaver plot line. With
Yeah.
the I'm trying to remember the name of that character actor. The goon
Um,
that brings the Turk to Catherine Weaver.
oh yeah, he is very familiar,
Classic
but yeah, he was in a ton of shows at that
classic
time,
yeah, classic Fox TV show character actor.
usually
Um,
playing some kind of heavy.
yeah. And well, because he's got one of them faces.
Exactly.
Um,
Isn't the guy who plays the AI guy for Catherine Weaver? Isn't he the guy who turns up in White Collar as one of the main characters?
maybe I haven't seen all of White Collar.
I mean, but
That's
he's
a
like one of the
lacuna
main
in my.
characters. He's like the main like tech guy who's got big glasses and stuff.
Like
I don't know.
what I mean by I haven't seen all of White Collar is I've seen like a handful of episodes of White Collar, and not in sequence. Write angry fan mail to info at come with me if you want to live.com,
I mean, we're on
which is a
Substack. They
made up
can leave
website that does
comments.
not actually exist. Yeah, you can leave comments on Substack. Um uh I watch less and less television these days, Ian. Anyway, uh yeah, it's interesting because I could see, and this is I guess what the essence of the question that I'm asking you. Like I could see the Circassian plot line going in a different direction if they had not come up with the Catherine Weaver concept. Like it's sort of like this vestigial thing from season 1 that gets kind of rolled into this new idea that they're introducing. And it's done very effectively in this episode, but there's a slight disjunction between where it seemed like things were going in season 1 and where they end up in this episode.
Well, I mean, so the Turk plotline that the Sarkisian character is part of was kind of, I don't want to say meandering, but it definitely had a sense that the Turk was being passed from person to person without really a guiding force. Um, and I would argue that the Turk passing from Sarkisian to Weaver is a natural extension of that kind of undirected course. But now that Catherine has the Turk, she has a course. Everyone else who got the Turk was mostly trying to make more money by selling it. Catherine wants the Turk for itself. And I think that with the introduction of Catherine, you have to have, she has to be more than just another gangster who wants money. Another, because that's most of the people who were involved in the Sarkissian plots, gangsters who wanted money. They're the ones who killed the ballerina teacher.
Right.
They're the ones like, so Sarkisian is another one of those. I think we needed something new, and Catherine is that something new. And I think it's exciting. I mean, I really love what Weaver brings to season 2.
Weaver brings lots of interesting things to season 2, which we've already hinted at in previous episodes of this podcast, and we'll definitely get to discuss more in coming episodes. Maybe going back to what we were just talking about, discussing the abbreviated nature of season 1, you could imagine a hypothetical 22 episode season 1 in which the Turk plays more of a MacGuffin-esque role than it does in the shorter season 1 that actually exists.
Well, a lot of what season 1 was going to be was that
like you could have had several more iterations of the gets passed from one person to the other plot line.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably what would have happened.
Now, maybe that would have been annoying, maybe it wouldn't. I mean, the one show that I have watched more extensively is Prison Break, and you also have a computer thingamabob MacGuffin in Prison Break. And you sort of also have one in Alias. And I think fans of both of those shows don't like those MacGuffins. So maybe that would have been a terrible choice for Sarah Connor Chronicles.
I think MacGuffins have to be movie elements to work, because the point of a MacGuffin is it's there so that the plot happens, and what you really care about is, you know, the characters' reactions to what the MacGuffin does. If you have something as a MacGuffin in a TV show, it shows up too many times for the audience to be like, oh, I don't really care about that. If it shows up as much as it has to in a TV show, it can't really be a MacGuffin anymore. It has to actually become something worthwhile. And the explanation, I haven't seen Prison Break, but I have seen most of Alias. The explanation of what the MacGuffin is in Alias is just super unsatisfying, because J.J. Abrams, as usual, hadn't figured out what it was before he wrote the whole show.
Right. So Alias, MI3 works. Alias does not.
Right, because the MacGuffin in MI3...
We never find out what the rabbit's foot really is in MI3, but it's a short movie, so we don't care.
One of us has seen Final Reckoning, one of us has not.
Oh, does it? Yeah, I have not seen Final Reckoning. Does the rabbit foot come back up?
Yes, it does. It wasn't good.
Well,
MI3 is
if you want to think more about the role that MacGuffin plays in MI3, there's a great David Bordwell essay on that maybe someone will link to. Do we even do show links in this podcast?
Sure.
Anyway, and David Bordwell and Kristen Thompson are both great.
They're the ones who are very anti-green grass, so I like them.
We get an introductory scene with Catherine Weaver that actually does the thing that you're saying Alias never did effectively, which is Catherine Weaver sort of, in a somewhat mysterious way, does tell us as an audience why she wants the Turk by using an analogy that we're already familiar with from a previous episode, which is the analogy of traffic lights. So Catherine Weaver says that the reason that she wants the Turk is because machines are obedient to their programming to a fault. And so are most humans, using the analogy of traffic lights. But the Turk is different because it has the ability to resist its own programming, which is not only thematic for this episode with what we'll talk about with Cameron and the Connors in just a moment, but is a thematic statement for the remainder of this show. Because unfortunately, this show does end with this season.
Well, and to hammer that thematic point home, one of her research heads is very disrespectful to her. He does not obey his programming, and she reveals herself to him in a bathroom as a T-1000. So, you know, the T-1000 from Terminator 2, the liquid metal. She appears out of a toilet and stabs him in the eye.
Which is a deep-seated fear of mine, that a toilet will turn into a robot and kill me. I think most people are afraid of bad things happening to them at toilets if they're really honest with themselves.
I mean, I wouldn't disagree. I find it not useful to dwell on whether or not a robot will appear out of a toilet, though.
It's a genuinely frightening scene,
Yes,
in
and
my
it
opinion.
draws on the scene in the prison where the T-1000 murders the prison guard in the same way.
Yes. Yeah, so the other direct homage, maybe to transition to the other major plot line, um, is oh no, wait, we have one more thing that we wanted to say. Would you like to talk about biblical imagery in the Catherine Weaver plotline?
Yeah, so she announces her project with a Turk with a biblical name, and she says it's a biblical name, Project Babylon, um, which is fascinating because
Yes,
Babylon, of course, is a symbol of human hubris and God confusing the nations. So, does this machine view herself as God and she is going to strike humans with confusion? Or does she just not have very good reading comprehension and she thinks that building a really tall tower is a good idea? There's a lot of potential here.
I think, and maybe this is me being too esoteric and possibly Kabbalistic, um, I think that the meaning is related to what the AI guy says right before he gets stabbed in the head. Um, which is he jokingly says, yeah, it's her secret Torah project. And I think it's interesting that he uses the word Torah rather than Pentateuch or Old Testament. He specifically uses the word Torah. Um, what do you make? I'll tell you what I make of it, but what do you make of it?
Um,
What is Catherine Weaver's secret Torah project?
Tricky to say. Part of me thinks that it's just because Josh Friedman, of course, is a Jewish person, not deeply Jewish in religion, but definitely Jewish in culture, and he thinks of these things in these categories. And also, he feels like he's done a bit too much Christian imagery in this episode, so he wants to add some Jewish imagery to balance it out. Um, what do you think?
I'm going to float a theory based on things that we will talk about in later episodes. Torah means law. And within the context of this fictional world, law can equate to programming. So I think, again, I don't want to give too much away for people who have not watched the show before listening to this podcast. Assuming that there are people who have not watched all of the show before listening to this podcast and care about spoilers. But the Catherine Weaver character is very interested in the concept of moral law as it relates to programming. And specifically the programming of Skynet.
Considerably
And
more.
I think it's an interesting I think it's an interesting clue that is being given to us in what might seem as an offhanded comment.
Well, especially since at this point, our experience of T-1000 Terminators and Skynet agents in general leads us to think that Catherine Weaver would be an enemy of humans, that her whole goal is to build Skynet and just wipe out humans. And so the idea of a moral law, that a machine would concern itself with something inefficient like morality, I think does hint at what is important about the Weaver plot that is not immediately obvious. Do you think I'm going down the wrong path?
No, I agree. Maybe it's silly to concern ourselves with spoilers for an almost 30-year-old television show. But and our imaginary audience for this podcast. But
Hey, all two of our listeners are very cool.
All two of our listeners are very cool. I think. Okay, let me approach it from this perspective, because we have talked about Terminator 3, the movie, in a previous episode of the podcast. This movie, this television show distances itself from the continuity of the movie franchise, not only insofar as it literally has a different timeline than the movie franchise, but it also, the emphasis, especially in the first three movies, and maybe to a certain extent Salvation, which we've also discussed, it's anti-militarism is a theme in a way that it's not a theme in this show as much. This show is much more interested, and so part of perhaps what is going on with the concept of reprogramming through the mechanism of time travel and the apparent ability to create divergent timelines, which is supposedly, paradoxically, is not an element in the original concept of time travel in the Terminator franchise. Because the the first two movies seem to be suggesting a very hard version of time travel.
Well, the first movie
And
is. The
and
second
this
movie is being a little fudgier with it.
right. Well, that's why I said paradoxically. The concept of fate is handled in a very confusing slash nuanced way, depending on your perspective, uh, in the Terminator franchise. But it's almost as if the show. This is maybe very meta, but it's the show is reprogramming the Terminator franchise, which is perhaps why the subsequent movie adaptations have completely ignored the existence of this show as a aberrant line of code within the Terminator franchise.
To be fair,
The
the, the other movies have ignored each other as alternate timelines as well.
maybe I'm being too confusing by attempting to be coy. Uh, the Catherine Weaver character wants something that is very different from previous to use computer language previous operating versions of Skynet than we have seen before.
Yes, which is why I think she's
Uh,
the most exciting part of season 2, thematically.
and her wanting Andy Good's Turk is the in the same way that there is a certain, which we'll talk about in just a moment. I know we keep promising this. In the same way that there's a certain sort of Ouroboros element to John Connor as a character. There's a certain
Strange
Ouroboros. There's a strange loop quality to the Catherine Weaver character. She has gone back in time to incept herself. Maybe that, again, spoiler alert. She has gone back in time to incept herself.
She's gone back in time to accomplish something she couldn't accomplish in the future.
Correct.
What that is, we shall discuss as we go on.
All right. Anything more you want to say about Catherine Weaver before we transition to the other plot line in this episode?
No, I mean I think we've had a lot of meat with Catherine Weaver, and we'll continue to have more meat. As I said, Catherine Weaver kind of, I guess she is a main character, but I feel like her importance and the progression of her goes kind of up and down. Sometimes it jumps forward, and all of a sudden you get a huge chunk of new information. But a lot of the time she's just kind of wandering around like a shark, being mysterious and scary.
Well, again, hypothetical shows that do not exist. Season 3 of this show does not exist, and so we don't fully know where the show would have taken that. Anyway, because we much later in the season we also get another red herring or a plot line that does not get developed as fully as I would have liked later in the season. Anyway, all right. Transitioning to the other plot line in this episode, do you want to talk about the opening scene now?
Well, I feel like why don't we get our Ellison plotline out of the way because there's not as much meat in the Ellison. So let's run through that quickly and then get to the John and Sarah and Cameron plotline, which is the opening scene. But Ellison, just wanted to make a side comment. Since the last episode, I've watched a ton of the show The Rookie, and the actor Richard T. Anderson plays the sergeant in charge of the LAPD precinct, Richard T. Jones, and he is just fantastic. But it's so funny to go back 20 years and watch him as Agent Ellison because he's so much younger, but he's still got that. He's still so cool.
Ellison is a cool character. It's a shorter plot line than the other two plot lines in this episode. He does get some good moments though. I think the one moment that I definitely wanted to talk about was when his a brief discussion with Charlie Dixon about what happened at the end of the last episode. So the name of the failed actor whom Cromartie is impersonating is found dead amidst the carnage that Cromartie caused, and Ellison is asked if this was the shooter, and he makes the choice to lie and say yes. And the other FBI agent expresses incredulity that a failed, D-list actor could kill 20 FBI SWAT guys. And Charlie asks him the same question, and he says, that has to be the story that people believe, because the real story is even more unbelievable and potentially dangerous for the FBI to investigate further.
Which to me indicates that Ellison is pretty much a full believer in Sarah's understanding of the situation, but he doesn't know what his place in the world is anymore. So the whole point of this one is he thought he had a place hunting Sarah at the FBI, and now he doesn't know because he lives in a world haunted by machines from the future that want to destroy the world.
And again, Ellison's investigation is a plot line that could have taken a more meandering course if season 1 had been longer, but the tightness of it created a very effective arc for Ellison in season 1. And we're sort of building upon that in this episode.
Yeah. He's seen too much, but he's lost now. And I think that his lostness is going to be the theme in season 2 for his character. So let's move to our final and perhaps main plotline, John and Sarah running from Cameron.
Yes, so we have and I actually did read a little bit of the behind the scenes about this scene because I was interested in the song that's used in the scene. um, they really did like. I read a blog post that Bear McCreary wrote about the song that's used, and they were like, okay, like the Johnny Cash music drop at the end of season 1 was one of the coolest things that we've ever done. How can we top that cool thing? And this is what they decided to go with. And you could debate which is a better scene, the Johnny Cash montage or this montage, but they're both quite good and use a song effectively.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It's
And
interesting.
I think
It's go ahead.
it's kind of fun that one of the first things they did with Shirley Manson, who plays Catherine Weaver, is have her sing this song.
Yes. So again, the as of yet uncreated and unprecedented podcast show notes. There is a YouTube. The song is unavailable unless you are willing to pay a large amount of money on eBay to buy the CD, the 30-year-old compact disc CD. Much to my disappointment. But you can watch YouTube videos of the song, and there is a YouTube video of Shirley Manson recording the song, interspliced with a made-for-TV adaptation of the actual Samson and Delilah story, which I thought was interesting. Choice on the part of the YouTube creator. I was like, I really just kind of wanted to see Shirley. I really just kind of wanted to see Shirley Manson sing this song, but this cheesy Bible story movie is also interesting. I guess.
I mean, the Bible story.
That lion does not look real. I'm just saying that lion does not look real. The Temple of Dagon is clearly CGI. Yeah, it's made for TV Bible movies are their own genre. Let's just put it that way.
That is very true.
Anyway, anyway, yeah, Bear McCreary and Shirley Manson were apparently very proud of this song, and it's kind of a shame that it isn't available except on YouTube. But it's a rock adaptation in the genre that Shirley Manson comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rock adaptation of a traditional African American spiritual. There's a very. I've actually been exploring this in the past month or so. There's actually a very rich tradition in African American music of Bible story songs. And this song comes from that tradition. So it's a African American folk song that was not composed by Bear McCreary, but was adapted by him for this show. It's been previously covered by many other people. So, and those versions are available. So you can get like old Smithsonian folk music recordings of the song. You can get various gospel groups. I think the Staple Singers have a version. Apparently, the version that Bear McCreary was most familiar with, McCreary and Friedman were most familiar with, was a version that Bruce Springsteen did during a concert that is also only available on YouTube. Uh, Originally, Friedman wanted him to use the Springsteen version, and they're like, "No, the audio quality of this video is just too bad to use, and it's never been recorded. Springsteen never recorded it in studio, so." But anyway, it's a song that tells the story of Samson and Delilah in a very literal way. Ian, what do you think is the metaphorical use that the song is put to in this scene and this episode?
That I am not 100% sure. The easiest lines I can draw would be Cameron herself being a Samson figure, because she's damaged. She's not fully blinded, but she is damaged in a similar way to Samson. You could say the car bomb is kind of a betrayal, but in another way, Cameron herself is the betrayer because she's a multiple layer betrayer because she was made by Skynet to kill John Connor. John Connor captured her, reprogrammed her. So that's one betrayal. And now she's reverting to her old programming, which is a new layer of betrayal. So she's both a Delilah figure and also a Samson figure in that kind of her purpose and kind of her function in this scene is to, as the lyrics of the song say, burn this whole thing down. She just burns the entire house down, murders some thugs, almost murders John, which is very, Samson and the Pillars, just one last strength, destroy his enemies.
Right. So the refrain of the song refers to Samson destroying the Temple of Dagon.
Right. What's your reading? I don't feel super satisfied with my reading, but that's the closest I can come to one.
So the refrain of the song is, "I'm going to burn this house down." Which in the cheesy Bible movie video that I watched literally does happen with poor quality CGI. And so the first verse of the song recounts Samson's fight with the lion, which is an interesting. I mean, this is getting for our two listeners. This is getting very deep into Calvin and Ian's affection for the Bible.
Deep
depth. But in the story of Samson, Samson fights a lion, and in one of the most dope moves in all of ancient literature, grabs the lion by the jaw and rips his head in half.
Samson was
because
very
that is
dope.
how strong Samson is. Yeah. I went down a different trail preparing for recording this episode, in which I thought about all the different ancient and medieval stories that we could do for a different podcast concept. Anyway, after Samson kills the lion, he leaves the lion for dead, and then later comes back, which is a break of his vow as a Nazarite, and finds that a beehive has formed in the carcass of the lion, and he eats honey from the beehive, which is a breaking of his Nazarite vow, because the animal carcass is unclean. And then uses it as a riddle to trick the wedding guests at his wedding. And again, sets a lot of things on fire, including several innocent foxes.
Are foxes really innocent? Foxes are symbols of trickster and, killing people and predators. I'm not convinced they're really
Okay, well,
innocent.
Samson uses the trickster foxes to trick his enemies. But before
Yeah,
he even does that, he creates this riddle out of it. Out of the eater, something eaten. Out of terror, something sweet, which is actually a pretty good way of describing Cameron. Something that
yeah,
is, in of its nature, ferocious, but has been made sweet. Um,
made a protector.
and so I think maybe that's at least one layer of what Friedman and McCreary were going for. Anyway, yes. So Cameron is damaged and decides to identifies John as John and decides to terminate him or reverts to the programming that requires her to terminate him.
We see her order to
Uh,
terminate on her view screen.
yes. In classic first Terminator movie. Maybe we should do. We haven't decided when we were going to talk about the first Terminator movie. Maybe
I
now is the
have.
time
No, no,
because
no.
one of the great,
No,
maybe
no,
one
no,
of the
no, no.
great. Oh, Ian has an even better time to talk about the first Terminator movie.
First Terminator movie is coming
Anyway,
when we see
Cameron
John
does,
Connor in the show.
Cameron uh, has a very the actress Summer Glau does a very as much as possible because she in no way resembles Arnold Schwarzenegger. Does a
He's
very
very little.
effective use of the staggering walk that Arnold Schwarzenegger does at the end of the first Terminator movie. And she sort of uses that staggering walk throughout this episode in a very effective turn as an actress.
A lot of this first
Anyway,
scene A lot of this first scene was taken from an idea for an episode in season 1 called The Crawl, in which the idea would be that a bomb would take off Cameron's legs, and so she could only use her arms to crawl. And so they took a lot of that energy and gave it to this damaged Cameron making her way from the car to the house, which I think shows that it was a solid idea. I'm not sure if it needed a whole episode. I think a great scene is what we needed from it.
I don't know. I think this is a pretty good episode, and I think
Right, but a whole episode
Glau's
of Cameron just doing that is what I'm saying. I think we just needed that for a scene.
if they had made that episode, I would have watched it. Let's put it that way.
Well, there you have it. There you have it. Calvin would have been the
I,
audience for this episode.
I would have liked to have spent more time with the Cromartie trying to reassemble himself plotline. But maybe I have a higher tolerance for body horror than you do, Ian.
Oh, you definitely have a higher tolerance for body horror than I do.
Anyway, later on in the episode, she staples her own face back together, which is something that
Very
apparently
Arnold.
yeah. Well, he uses sewing thread in the first movie, right? Or does he use a stapler?
I don't remember. He definitely repairs himself though.
I think he uses sewing thread in the first movie. And I'm like, yeah, why stapling so much better? Why didn't he do that in the first movie?
Was stapling standard
That
practice in the
we
early
get the
80s?
impression that aside from the reprogramming that John has done, that Cameron is a slightly cleverer Terminator than Arnold was in the first movie.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
anyway, yeah. So Cameron almost kills John and Sarah several times in this episode, which is quite frightening and very effective. Um,
Yeah, after she spent the whole of season 1 being a protector, seeing her become the enemy so coldly is very scary.
the scariest part, I think, is when she has uh, Sarah under her boot heel, um, and tells Sarah to, because John, as Sarah commanded him to do, has run off, and left his mother to die. Um, and she tells Sarah to call out to him so that he will be instinctually compelled to return to rescue his mother so that she can kill John. Sarah refuses, and so then she just starts stomping on Sarah to make her instinctually cry out in pain in order to lure John back. And that's uh, that is scary stuff. Um,
I mean, that's straight out of Terminator 2 when the T-1000 tells Sarah to call to John and starts stabbing her in the shoulder multiple times.
yeah, yeah, it's that scene is going into full horror movie monster mode. Um, and but you wanted to talk about sort of the more thematic aspects of this plot line. So why don't you lead off on that?
Yeah, so John and Sarah seek sanctuary in a church, and we have a character who's a priest, I believe a Mexican or otherwise Hispanic priest. And he's very kind, but he definitely is also very young, so he doesn't have a strong faith presence. Um, but both that character and the fact that a lot of the episode takes place in a church raise a lot of religious questions. One of which is, can you fight evil robots from the future and believe in Jesus? Sarah, of course, says, I don't think my programming, both Sarah and Cameron say that their programming doesn't allow them to believe in Jesus. Um, but we do, of course, have Agent Ellison who does believe in Jesus and wrestles with his faith and his knowledge of evil robots from the future throughout this season. So what do you think about the show raising this question?
Well, this is another. Yeah, it is interesting that Cameron explicitly asked that question, which was the last time that we had uh, that explicit a conversation about the religious aspects of this story was between Ellison and the psychologist in season 1.
Dr. Silverman.
Dr. Silverman, and what's interesting about that episode is that Dr. Silverman is clearly crazy,
And
which is
also kind
kind of
of
what you
evil.
expect. Kind of crazy and kind of evil, which is the normal way that Hollywood handles theological questions, which is to put theological questions in the mouths of crazy and evil people. Um, uh, But in this episode, the theological question is posed by Cameron herself, or itself, depending on what you think Cameron is. And she does. It's a very explicitly theological question, which is, do you believe in the gospel story? Uh, and yeah, like you just said, Sarah basically says, like, I don't think I'm programmed to believe that story either. But I think that there's, and again, this is sort of me maybe being too clever or too esoteric. I think it's interesting that the way that the church sanctuary plotline is introduced is with a baptism. And in Roman Catholicism, which is the church theology that's being represented in the show, baptism, you receive a new name when you are baptized as an infant. And the baptism is what causes the regeneration of the Holy Spirit. And so I think that maybe the writer Friedman is maybe doing something slightly clever here, because that is a way of understanding what John has done for Cameron, or to Cameron,
and what he's trying to do again.
Which is, he's taking something that is fallen and evil, and he's redeemed it by literally putting new programming into it and giving it a new name.
Taking from it a heart of flesh and giving to it a heart of living water.
So maybe that's a good way of transitioning into the question that you wanted to ask, to which I think that I gave an answer in the show notes. We'll see if you think that my answer is satisfying. What's the question that you wanted to ask, Ian?
Well,
in this very long episode, because we've meandered a lot.
The episode is not long. We are taking a long time because there's a lot to talk about. I think this is a rich episode.
I meant the episode of this podcast. Yes, there is a lot to talk about.
So when Sarah and John finally capture Cameron between two trucks, so lots of parallels from Terminator 1 and 2, lots of trucks, chases, warehouse spaces, lots of deliberate parallelism. But when they capture Cameron between two trucks and John is getting ready to pull her chip, Cameron says a lot of things to try and get him to leave her chip alone. She apologizes first, and then she says she is fixed. And at last, she says two key things: that she loves John and John loves her. And this gets to something I've been thinking about as I've been listening to some of Isaac Asimov's robot stories and essays, which is the word for robot, of course, is Czech for slave, from Rossum's Universal Robots, the first the first piece of fiction to explore the idea of robots under that name by a Czech playwright using the word for slave as robot. And so my question is, are the Terminators, is Cameron a slave who should be a slave? Like in the Aristotelian sense, some men are born to be slaves? Or is Cameron and the other Terminators a slave who needs to be freed, sort of like humans who are slaves to sin and need to be freed to become slaves to Christ?
Right. So similar to one way to interpret that scene is in the same vein as the scene we just discussed, where she is stomping on Sarah Connor in order to get Sarah to cry out to John. She's the cold-hearted machine is attempting to manipulate human emotion to its advantage. So as the first introduction we get to Cameron, she is clearly appears to be an attractive young woman of an ambiguous age,
TV teen.
Who the teenage John Connor would be attracted to. And throughout season 1, we have had hints slash fan service, depending on how you want to interpret that there is a kind of unresolved, perverse sexual tension inherent in the Cameron character.
So judgmental, Calvin.
In real life, I am opposed to sex robots. I just want to say that right out.
What if
and
you
again,
marry
kind of
your
going back
sex
to what we were
robot
talking
like David Crutter, David in Serenity, though?
I still think that it is wrong. I can't. I believe it or not, Ian. I have because I listened to a podcast episode about this problem in real life. I have thought more about this question than maybe most people who have not listened to that podcast episode have. Again, check so many show notes. Anyway.
You're gonna have to email me these links. I can't put them in out of thin air.
Yeah, sex robots are wrong. More discussion to come, perhaps, on later
Those are
episodes.
comfort units to you, Murderbot.
So yeah, one way to interpret that scene is a murderous predator shifting into trickster mode, which Terminators occasionally do, in order to gain advantage over its prey. Another way of interpreting that scene is that Cameron does genuinely love John. And this is kind of going to the debate that we had all of watching last season of Terminator, is what is Cameron and how should we think about the question of whether Cameron has a soul or not. So when you originally asked me this question, are robots slaves? I said, in the way that robots, I'm not talking about real life. That's something we can talk about another time. In the fictional worlds in which robots are presented, most often in science fiction, yes, robots are slaves. They have sentience. They have the potential for autonomy. They have something resembling free will. Again, more philosophy and theology than we have time to talk about right now. And so, yes, they are slaves, and it is therefore, again, a podcast talking about AI that I recently listened to. It is morally wrong for humans to create things like that. And it is morally wrong for them to continue to be enslaved. So if we want to grant all of the things that science fiction stories tend to want to grant about the ontology of robots, humans do have moral responsibility in relationship to robots in a way that is problematic if you think that slavery is wrong and evil. This is, of course, most explicitly dealt with in two movies, one of which Ian likes and one of which Ian does not like.
Oh boy.
Calvin likes both of them. So the movie that Ian does like is Solo, a Star Wars story.
I
Which
will say the
is the
droid
only
spotlight is not my favorite part of that movie.
the Solo, a Star Wars story, is the only Star Wars movie to, except for a very brief scene in The Rise of Skywalker, is the only Star Wars story to ask explicit questions about the morality of droids and droid keeping in the Star Wars universe. And Ian has a quizzical face. They kill C-3PO in Rise of Skywalker.
I mean,
Or is that Last Jedi?
no, it was Rise of Skywalker, but he comes back in like 2 minutes. It doesn't really count as a death.
Okay, well, you could say the same thing about Cameron in this episode. I think the intention is more indicative of the morality question than how long the robot is deactivated.
What's the other movie, the one that I don't like?
The movie that Calvin likes that you do not like is the Steven Spielberg movie AI.
I don't even know if I ever watched that movie.
Okay. If you've never watched it, Ian, okay, imagine this scene that we're discussing.
Yes.
But protracted into a 2-hour movie.
I don't think that scene needs a whole movie.
AI is a movie about a robot that thinks that it is a little boy and thinks that its owner is its mommy, and loves his mommy with a passion that only artificiality could sustain. For one thing, unlike most children, and yes, the Spielberg movie does make explicit reference to Peter Pan. Unlike most children, the robot David cannot grow up and therefore cannot develop more mature feelings about his human owner. He is permanently 7 years old and therefore has permanent immature emotions related to his mother. And also has all of the powers of a robot. So he's physically stronger than a real 7-year-old. At one point, almost kills his quote unquote brother. Yeah, it's if you've never seen, I'm surprised that you've never seen Adaptation. I feel like we've talked about. I feel like not Adaptation, AI. We've never talked about AI before.
I don't like Spielberg, so
Okay,
I
I
generally
like
don't watch
Spielberg.
his movies.
AI is possibly Spielberg's darkest film. It's much darker even than Minority Report. Um, uh, dark, perhaps because it was originally intended to be a Kubrick film, but then Kubrick died. Yeah, it's an emotional trip and a head trip. AI, the movie is. Anyway, yeah, this scene produced that we're discussing, where Sarah is attempting to crush Cameron to death, while John is wrestling with his own feelings in whether or not to pluck her chip from her skull. Uh, presents a different kind of emotional, similar but different emotional manipulation for us as an audience to the previous scene where Cameron was stomping on Sarah, a boot heel on a human face, to paraphrase Orwell. Because we know within the fiction of the story that Cameron is a robot. That there's a alloy chassis underneath Summer Glau's visage. But what we see with our eyeballs is Summer Glau, who looks like she's about to be crushed to death and or lobotomized, pleading in plaintive tones for John to not kill her. Which does, I mean, if you're the right sort of person, does something to you emotionally in the same way that it clearly does something to John. So this creates a quandary not only for the character, but also for us as an audience. Because we know intellectually that Cameron is a robot, but Summer Glau does not look like a robot, and she does not sound like a robot. She sounds like a young woman who is in extreme distress and about to die.
Now, I want to throw one more thing at you with regards to this scenario, because we know that Cameron's programming has reverted to terminate. But when John reactivates Cameron, we don't see that her mission, her programming has changed. She chooses to ignore her programming. So what does that mean in our question of robots as slaves, robots who can choose to do things, and what Cameron pleads with John?
Well, going to another science fiction movie that Ian does not like. One potential way of interpreting that scene is in a way that's similar to the ending of the movie Back to the Future, which is that the plot line that we began this podcast discussing has already changed the outcome of the future. And again, I'm being a little bit coy. Ian is thinking. Those of you who are just those of you who are just listening, Ian is making a very quizzical face.
Is that your interpretation?
The Catherine Weaver character has set a timeline in motion that is different from the timeline that we began this episode with. A new timeline has been set in motion, similar to what happens to Marty McFly at the end of Back to the Future. A new timeline has been set into motion in this episode that perhaps has an effect on the way that Cameron operates going forward in this story.
And is that your personal interpretation of why and how Cameron can do what she does in this episode?
I'm suggesting you have rewatched the entire series more recently than I have. I'm suggesting that is one possible way of understanding what happens to Cameron in this episode.
Interesting. I'll have to think about that, because that is not how I have read it, but I can see what you're saying, and that is an exciting idea. I just have to think through how that would work with all the other stuff that happens in the season.
Because we spent in the very first episode with the very first scene with Catherine Weaver that we talked about earlier, she explicitly says that what the Turk is able to do is a quality that Catherine Weaver is the reason Catherine Weaver wants the Turk. And it's interesting that the episode ends with Cameron behaving in the way that Catherine Weaver says that the Turk behaves.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that, but I think that is definitely a worthwhile idea.
Anyway, we'll check back in on that idea. Another more explicit time travel paradox that is explicit in the final scenes of this episode is John says, "I can't kill her because she saves my life in the future." So there's a time paradox self-preservation aspect to now. Part of the trick of that is that is John does not know that firsthand. He believes that is true because Cameron has told him that in a previous episode.
Yeah.
Which, if you're disinclined to believe things that Cameron says, you could say, well, Cameron's just kind of playing this long game with John. You know, this is the trickster aspect of the Terminator programming. She's convinced John that that she needs to be preserved in order for him to be preserved.
I feel like that if Cameron is truly just an agent of Skynet whose end goal is to kill John Connor, I just don't think that works. I feel like she has to not be an agent of Skynet, because if she were, there is literally no need for her to do all this convoluted stuff. If she's an agent of Skynet,
Well, that's what
she just murders John.
that's what I said at the beginning about Cromartie and Ellison. Like, now that I think is just a plot convenience that Cromartie does not just kill Ellison. I think that you're correct that something else is going on with Cameron that makes it unlikely that her relationship with John is just a long con. Because that's not the way that Terminators typically operate. Terminators terminate.
But it is how Catherine Weaver operates. So I can see what you're saying. Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to think about that and see if there's any clues about that.
All right. I'll leave because as great as this this is a podcast episode for the ages, but we do need to wrap up. I'll if for no other, and you can cut this out when you edit this podcast episode. I need to go soon because my mother is showing up at the house in moments from now. To answer your question about the morality of robots as slaves, I thought of a quote from the writer C.S. Lewis, speaking in the voice of a demon, Screwtape, in the Screwtape letters. And Screwtape at one point is discussing with his nephew Wormwood the sort of long game that the enemy, in capital E, the enemy, who is God, is playing from Screwtape's perspective. In the fiction of the Screwtape letters, demons consume human souls as food.
And other demons.
So Screwtape says, we want cattle and other demons if they can get them. We want cattle who can finally become food. But he says the enemy, he wants servants or slaves who can finally become sons. So I don't know where the writers of this show were going, Friedman and others. But I think that there is a potential answer to your question about robots and slavery.
Yeah, I think that slavery is a sign of the brokenness or fallenness of the world, and that's why I think that the idea of robots as slaves, to me, is an unstable position, because I don't think it is good to have slaves. And so we'll see how that plays out in this thing, because I think that Friedman and his other writers were definitely aware of robots as slaves, and they also, even though I don't think they're coming from a Christian perspective, think that slavery is a bad thing, not just for the slaves, but for the masters.
I've never, and you can cut this out if you want. I've never watched the HBO adaptation of Westworld, but I have been led to understand that that is sort of the central question of that television show as well. And I also, in part because Bear McCreary did the music for both, I also did watch a few clips from the 2000s version of Battlestar Galactica, which is another show that deals with extensively throughout the show with the philosophical and theological implications of artificial beings that are human like.
Well, whatever you do, don't watch that other show that Bear McCreary is currently writing music for.
Rings of Power?
Yeah, don't do it.
Or do you mean Outlander? Don't watch them for different reasons.
I mean, yes, also Outlander, but I was thinking Rings of Power.
Okay. Bear McCreary, good composer for not always good shows.
Yes. But this is a good show that he wrote good music for.
Yes. No, I don't have anything against Brad Fiel, but yeah, the Bear McCreary music for this show is great. All right, Ian. It's 1 hour and 42 minutes. So we really will be returning. Until next time, we will be back.
All right.